Hello, Unbreakable Mompreneurs. If you are feeling stuck and you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do this, or I don't know how to juggle, or you're just feeling like you're in this box and you don't know how to break out of it, well, today is the day because we are going to talk with Betsy Pepine, and she is going to tell us her journey and story and what we can do. So, my name is Charisse Walker, your host, and without further ado, Betsy, why don't you introduce yourself to us?
Thank you, Charisse. I'm Betsy Pepine. I'm a broker of real estate and really all things regarding real estate. I have a passion for in the state of Florida, and also run a nonprofit that I'm very passionate about to service folks in our community that will never use our services on the real estate side, cost burden families that need housing, and we've partnered with Habitat and help build houses for them.
That is so cool. I love that. So tell us your journey. How did you get into real estate? What made you decide to do that?
So I was in the pharmaceutical industry. After graduate school, I was in the pharmaceutical industry for a decade. And I was in that industry in healthcare because of a lot of pressure from that I felt from my family of origin. There was an expectation that my siblings and I would be physicians. And my dad's a physician. We grew up working in his hospital. Both of my sisters ended up being physicians. We were all pre-med. And I knew I didn't want to be a physician. And I think I was in the healthcare arena just to placate that familial expectation of me. Anyway, I found myself when my children were 1 and 2 in a very short period of time. There was a corporate layoff at my pharmaceutical company, or the drug that I was on did not get FDA approval, and they laid off the entire team. And I also found myself suddenly single with my girls. They were 1 and 2. And I think when you feel like life has thrown you a curveball, you start evaluating what's working and what's not working. And I just felt like I was living in this box that I'd been living under these expectations of others. And I felt like universe, God, source, whatever we want choose to call that, I felt like was calling me to really pursue what I've truly loved to do since I was little. And that's combining real estate, which I've always loved, with entrepreneurship. And so that's what got me into the real estate. I think a lot of people thought I was crazy because I was leaving an industry that historically has provided well for people in terms of income and benefits for the family. I was always, I had the more stable job, even in the marriage, in terms of benefits and salary. And to leave that and jump into an industry that's highly variable. 80% of realtors don't make it their first year. And your income, if you do make it, is very transient. It can be at times. So I think a lot of people did not agree with the decision that I made at the time, but it was the best decision. Truly one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life.
And so let's touch on that a little more, because when you decide to do something, because I was talking with somebody last week, I'm going to digress for a second, and I was going to this conference, and this person I was talking to that I love dearly said, I was watching this TV show about cults, and you're just in a cult. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm not, but thanks for your opinion. And so people who love us, they try to protect us. And
Mhm.
so how did you break that cycle of saying, I don't need to please my parents, or I don't need to please this person, and I don't need to listen to them. I'll take their
Mhm.
advice, great. They're welcome to have their opinion, but I'm going to
Mhm.
go over here and do what I feel like I need to do. How did you, that mind shift, how did you do it?
Mhm. I think for me, it's just, and I tend to do things way too late. I have a high tolerance for pain, which is not good, I mean, in terms of like emotional pain. And I don't exit relationships, even if they're familial, when they're not serving me. And I'm not saying that my family is not serving me at all, but in terms of like, I held on to that. I stayed in that industry for 10 years, and it literally took a divorce and a layoff for me to wake up and say, I'm just not happy.
Mhm.
Um, so for me, it just became a point of every time, every time I'm saying yes to them, I'm saying no to me. And realizing that
Mhm.
was and I don't know, I think it was just those two events happening so quickly together, just really was a wake up call and made me think, wait a minute, I'm not going to be here forever. It's not like I had this unlimited amount of time. If I'm going to make a move, now would be ideal.
Mhm.
Um, it was very difficult. What was even more difficult probably was when I told my parents I was dropping out of pre-med. So my sisters and I all went to the same college. We were all pre-med. And junior year, I had to declare, and I just couldn't do it.
Mhm.
And, I definitely dropped several levels in their, they have a hierarchy of status. And being a physician for them, that is just truly next to God. It's just like what it's almost like if you weren't, everyone wants to be a physician. And if you aren't, it's because you couldn't make it. It's, that was kind of the environment I grew up in and around. So to tell them I was not going to do pre-med and go at the business route, and was not looked highly upon by my family. So that was probably the more difficult decision, was letting them know that. And they didn't support it, told me that financially they weren't going to, support me after college, which I wasn't expecting anyway. But, if I had continued on a medical school, they would have. But I had to say yes to myself, and they got over it. And then when I went into the pharmaceutical industry, and it was fine. And then when I told them I was going to become a realtor, that was another shock to their system, because real estate, you only need an online class and you
Yeah.
pass one test.
Yep.
You compare that to what's required to be a physician, it doesn't hold a candle.
I know, but if you're good at it, you make
Cor-
way more than you do as a physician.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
with a lot less liability.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's do the Paul Harvey rest of the story. Fast forward, you
Mhm.
have 5 successful, thriving businesses now. How
Mhm.
does your family, do they still feel that way about you, or have they said, oh, wow, there is another path?
They they do say that now.
Okay.
Um, what saddened me was that I didn't feel like I had that recognition until I had made it in their eyes. And
Mhm.
that's what's always hurt me, is that, and I try to raise my girls where I don't care what they do.
Mhm.
I want, my goal from the time they were born is for them to be happy and independent, caring individuals, but that we're happy. And that really wasn't, I don't think, my parents' goal. And it wasn't that they were being hard on me. That's, I think, the environment they grew up in. They saw their parents go through everything, and they wanted what they thought was best
Right.
for their children. And they were providing for that. I mean, financially, I had it on my plate. I mean, I didn't have to do anything if I wanted that as my path. And so they really were trying to look out for me. And I know that. Um, but it did hurt me that they didn't really recognize what I did until when I got into real estate. My mother flat out told me, you do what you want, Betsy, or you need to do what you need to do, but just know you won't be our realtor. And
Oh my gosh.
and I said, wow. I said, why? And she said, well, do you remember so and so? And I said, yeah. She's like, well, she helped us buy this house. I was in the house. I was at my childhood home at the time. And I said, yeah, Mom, but that was 40 years ago. And she said, yeah, but every year since, she sent us a box of chocolate at Christmas. And, I thought, I was absolutely hurt, but it also gave me hope. I was like, wow, if that's all it takes to create a loyal customer for life, is a box of chocolate every Christmas, I'm going to do quite well in this industry.
That's a good way to look at it. That's fantastic. And it is true because as a realtor myself, there are a lot of people that do not keep in touch. It's very transactional, and I'm not that person. Mine is a relationship. So client appreciation events, multiple different things throughout the year. We call them Popeyes, making sure that you stay in touch. And because of that, like a huge part of my business is referral.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, most of it, because that's what the way I want to work. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that happened to you. And I'm sorry that
It's
because
all good. It's all good. I'm
I
not.
know, but it does affect you, because then I think, does it feel like you have to propel yourself even more? And so you become even more competitive, and I got to do this. I got to do this. Like, not necessarily to prove them wrong, but just for the validation, like what I'm doing
Mhm.
is right.
Well, I do struggle with that even to this day, where making, and I'm working on it, just, and it's hard because like rationally, I know I'm of value,
Yeah.
but when you're raised in an environment where your value is directly tied to what you produce, what your outcomes are, that's a hard thing to internalize, just to know you have intrinsic value.
Mhm.
So, and I do have to question sometimes, because I feel like I'm always striving for what's next, what's next. I'm like,
Mhm.
Betsy, I have to say, is this what I really want? Or do I want this because I want what people, my family will think of me when I achieve this,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. Because then the burnout happens and then you're floundering.
Yeah.
So let's switch gears for a minute. I didn't, and I appreciate you being vulnerable and you opening up, because I think a lot of people do struggle with that. And it's a mind game. It really is. To be successful, it's that mind. You got to break out of your box, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about
Mm-hmm.
your book and how you came to write it and what it's about.
Mm-hmm. I came to write it. I'm 56 years old, and in my mid to late 40s, I started getting discontent. And I was really frustrated. And I actually wouldn't even admit it to myself for about a year, because I didn't feel like I had the right to be unhappy. I see so much. I mean, I'm very aware of
Right.
so many people have so much less than I understand that. And so I didn't feel like I had the right to be unhappy or express it. But when I finally did, I started journaling. I've always journaled, but I started journaling more intentionally. I started therapy for the first time in my life, meditation, yoga. I did bioenergetic work, a whole bunch of different modalities to uncover the source of this discontentment. And the common thread was throughout my life, and then too, and still sometimes now, I would find myself in these boxes that I did not want to be in. And whether they're boxes that were imposed on by society, peers, family, or myself,
Mhm.
and started writing about them. And then when I started talking to other people about them, especially women, they had their own stories. Um, and so I ended up writing a book about my journey in, through, and out of these boxes, because there's so many, and there's so many you don't even realize that they're boxes. You don't, it's hard to explain, but if you don't know there's choices outside of what you're currently living, you don't realize, oh my goodness, I don't have to live like this, or this doesn't have to be this way. And so my goal in writing the book was really just to help one woman look at something a little bit differently and say, is this really working for me? And if it's not, helping her identify ways to overcome. I found there's three main fears that are obstacles to getting out of a box that no longer serves them, and helping them get free.
Mhm. That is so good, because I think that a lot of people, they have this untapped potential, and they got to get out of their own boxes first to be able to accomplish what they really could have and what they
Mm-hmm.
deserve because of whatever's happened to them. So what do you attribute your success to?
I don't get asked that a lot. Um, I think I think for me, I was born very curious. I'm a wonderer. I'm incessantly curious, almost to a fault. And so I'm always learning and seeking that. I mean, I do that in my downtime. I love to learn about anything, how
Mm.
things work, how businesses, I've always been fascinated by business in general and how it works. And really just, it's funny because I think a lot of people think that perhaps entrepreneurs are money oriented, and I'm very fascinated by money, but not for why people think that. I live very modestly,
Mhm.
I'm not a materialistic person. I just have always been fascinated by the concept of creating value and people willing to exchange money for value that I create. So that's kind of my mode. So I think just being curious and always having an open mind to learning has probably been the biggest accelerant of my growth. Because I tend not to take things personally, which helps. I'm always looking for input and feedback and how can I grow and what do I need to learn and who can I meet, and truly wanting it and seeking it and absorbing it and getting feedback and then internalizing it and taking what I can and leaving what doesn't work for me and not being okay with that. So I think that mindset has helped me tremendously.
That's good because you have to believe in yourself. You have to make sure that what you talked about is possible. And so somebody listening, if they heard that you got out, you started real estate, you became a broker, but now you have these other businesses. So what made you decide to start those and how?
Mm-hmm. So so I got into real estate, I got my broker license, and I really only thought it was just going to be me. I like working for myself. I like making the decisions. And so I became a broker. I was working out of my house. Agents started asking if they could come join me. I'm like, you can join me, but I'm not offering you anything. I mean, I'm literally working out of my house.
Mhm.
But if you want to hang your license with me, go ahead. So that happened for about 2 years. And then I've got like 6 or 7 people working for me. And it was getting a little unmanageable because nothing was planned. It was just chaotic. And so I got a coach and he's like, Betsy, go big or go home. And I'm like, well, I'm already home. Like, let's go big. So that helped put some vision and structure. Because honestly, prior to getting that coach, I didn't think more than a week or two ahead of time. So I got the coach probably 15 years ago. And that changed my life because then that opened up lots of other doors. So I created a plan and I started building the brokerage. Once I had the brokerage in place and running, I do get bored very easily. And so, I got the brokerage running and I said, well, okay, what other ways can I add value to the customers we're already serving? And so it was natural to add mortgage and title. So I did that. Then those were in place and it was about 5 years later. I'm like, okay, I'm getting bored again. What else can I add? What can I add in terms of value for our agents? Well, a real estate school, they need continuing education and I need a recruiting mechanism. So a real estate school fit that bill beautifully. So now our agents can do their CE with us, but we can also use it as the pre-licensing class and we get, a look at all of the people that are wanting to get their license. So that's why the school came to be. Property management was just a natural extension of wanting to help our agents get listings. And I said, okay, well, if we're going to be managing properties when they're ready to sell, if we've done a great job, they will think of us. So that's how the property management company came to be. And then the nonprofit was really a result of my business school. When I was in business school, one of the classes, oddly, you could take is I went to school in Philadelphia and we could gut row homes on the weekends. And with donated labor and supplies, we rebuilt the homes and then sold them to at-risk cost burden families for nominal price. I mean, because most everything was donated. But I saw the impact that a house can make on the trajectory of a family. And that stayed with me when I was in real estate. And I said, how can I give back to that community that will never be in a position to call a realtor and go buy a house? And so then we created the nonprofit in 2018. And that's honestly what I get my most fulfillment from is seeing the impact we're making on those families.
That is amazing. I love how you married it. I was talking with, because I've built a team as well, and I was training one of my people yesterday, and this genius idea came up that, I mean, I've been in real estate for 10 years, and I'm like, how did I not ever think about this at all? And so I'm like, now we got to open a business and start doing it. And because it's true. If you have, I mean, if you look at the different niches, what are their needs? And if you figure out what their needs are, now you can create a solution to it. And now you can go solve that problem. So she starts laughing at me. Charisse, you're involved too much, right? But I think as an entrepreneur, we do get bored. We totally get bored, and
Yeah.
we start to be like squirrel, squirrel.
Yeah.
But if you go too far away from what you're doing, then you get distracted. So
Right. So I do try to keep it in
yeah,
the general real estate space.
that's great. That's really fantastic. Okay, so our time is limited, but I just want to know what would be your three tips for our listeners? If they're listening, like, okay, I need to get out of my box. What
Mhm.
would be your advice for them to break out of that?
Yeah. Well, great. I say kudos to you for even being aware that you're in a box, because that's the first step. Then identify what is holding you back. Like, why are you in the box if it's not serving you? And it's usually fear based. So, fear of change, fear of loss. So, fear of change is how I combat that is change is usually just being in an uncomfortable situation. So I encourage people to put themselves purposely in uncomfortable situations on a regular basis. That is one of the reasons I take an ice cold shower every single morning, because I know if nothing else happens throughout the day, I have made myself uncomfortable for at least 5 minutes, right?
Oh, wow.
But it's like a muscle, and it builds and it strengthens. So you get very comfortable being uncomfortable, and you start to recognize an observer. You start to recognize how your body reacts and how you can respond. And so change doesn't feel as threatening to you. So that's one fear. Fear of failure is the other big fear. For me, that's a mental construct. That's a box. That's that a box to me. It doesn't boxes don't exist in any world but the human world. I've got two dogs sitting right here beside me. They are not contemplating if they're going to fail going to chase a squirrel this afternoon. That doesn't enter their mind. It's it's just an opinion we place on something that we have done. And we can place any opinion we choose on that outcome. So for me, I don't choose failure. That is not an option in my life. It doesn't exist, because for me, I always say, okay, Betsy, what's the worst that can happen if I take path B?
Mhm.
Worst case, it doesn't go my way, right? I have to pivot.
Mhm.
Okay. And I will have learned, I don't know what it is yet, but I will have learned something very valuable that I'm sure I can use throughout the duration of my life here on earth. So that's worst case scenario. And research has shown worst case scenario happens 3% of the time. I'm willing to take that.
Yeah.
Right. So for me, the failure box just does not even exist. And then the fear of loss is a real one. It's either loss of status, loss of social connection, or loss of financial impact. Status was the one I feared for a long time in my family, and I did lose it. And I had to be okay with that. I went down several levels when I decided not to be pre-med and not to be in the healthcare industry. That hurt. I mean, it did. I was young. It would hurt today too, but I think I would be able to handle it um, much more healthily, because I have a much more secure sense of myself outside of that. But I didn't at the time when I was in my 20s. Fear of, but I do with the status, because sometimes I still sometimes feel myself resistant from some things. And I'm like, what is that? What is that resistance? And I can tell it's ego. And I said, no, Betsy, don't ever let your ego decide something. And I just mentally or visually in my head say, put your ego on the shelf and move forward. Don't let the ego impact your decision. The fear of social connection, a loss of social connection, that will happen when you start to grow. You will change your social circle. It's not bad. It's necessary pruning to grow, but you've got to be aware that that's going to happen. And if you can proactively shore up social connections in this new path you're carving, it will help ease the loss you feel from folks that just can't adapt to the new you, your new path. Where you're headed is not going to align with everybody that's currently in your circle. There are so many great mentors out there that can help you shore up those connections, so it's not going to feel as hard when you lose some. And then the fear of the fear of financial loss. I did have a big fear of that jumping into real estate. Nowadays, which was not 20 years ago, there's so many options available for the gig economy. You can drive for anybody and make ancillary income or have these startup businesses online. Those weren't options 20 years ago, but now they are. So there's just so many ways you can shore up your financial stance so that making a transition in a career is more palatable. So that's what I would recommend to your audience who are in a box and are trying to get out of one.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
So we didn't talk about momhood at all. And so I just want to ask you one question, which is really because, I mean, you started where they were just toddlers still in diapers and having to navigate all that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were to sit on a park bench and this 9-month pregnant first time mom came and sat next to you and you see her waddle as she sits down on the park bench and you just kind of chuckle like, I remember that time. And now where you are today, what is one piece of advice that you would give that mom?
Well, I write a whole chapter, a couple of chapters, about 3 chapters in my book about that. And that is the good mom box. And I was not aware of that box until I had my child, but I was shocked at how quickly moms judge other moms about their parenting, and even the competition with infants and who's walking first and who's eating first and it was ridiculous. And I would just say to be true to herself. I threw out the good mom box. I decided this when they were in kindergarten and first grade. I said, this is crazy. I'm not playing this game anymore. And I exited it. And I talk about that in my book, but that's the biggest advice I would give to her. Stay true to what you know to believe to be true and what's best for your children. And then the other thing, just because of my own childhood, is I would encourage any mom, any parent to really, when they make decisions when they're young, asking themselves, what is the ultimate goal in parenting? And for me, it was having children or adults who were independent, good citizens, and were happy and well-adjusted. So I let go of needing them to get straight A's and needing them to go to top schools and being top ranked and being involved. And in fact, I write about this. I totally stepped away from checking up on, was their homework in? Was it correct? Was the project done on time? I let it all go on them. Now, I provided support when they asked, but my goal was not, did they get an A or a great grade? It was, can they figure it out themselves? And the independence and self-sufficiency that would create in them. And my favorite saying to them was always, I don't know, but you'll figure it out. And they now tell me that when I'll say, well, what are you going to do about this? They're now 25 and 26. And they're happy as a clam. And they're like, I don't know, Mom, but I'll figure it out. And they don't know how much joy that brings me because I know they are fine. And that took me, they were in kindergarten and first grade. And when I made that realization that I was doing it for me, I wanted them to get good grades for me, but I wasn't looking at what the long-term impact was on them.
That is fantastic advice that I haven't heard before from people as I asked that question. And that is so true because honestly, I never even thought about that for them to get the good grades for me, like I know one of my children, they're super, super intelligent, but they have a hard time remembering to turn in work, or they have OCD. So they have a hard time being able to not make it perfect. And so they could take, and I'm not joking, 6 weeks to write a 3-page essay. And like, gratefully the teachers worked with them, but it's like, really, it doesn't have to be perfect. And they floundered. And I would rather them be able to learn the skills of it doesn't have to be perfect and it's okay while they're still in the house than moving outside. And so I had to transition because I was that person that had to be perfect at everything, had to do everything right, and had because of other issues, I realized. And so I'm like, I cannot put that pressure on my children. But then there's that fine line of you go the opposite way because the swing, which we'll get to later, but it's hard. It's hard to be a parent. And so I think that that's fantastic advice that they'll figure it out because it gives them confidence in themselves as well.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, if our listeners wanted to find you, how would they do that?
Yeah. So I have a website, which is my name, betsypepine.com. I'm also on all the social channels with my name at Betsy Pepine.
Fantastic. Well, Betsy, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you, Charisse. I appreciate it.
And our listeners, I hope that you, as you're listening, and if you could identify one of those three boxes that you're sitting in, break out of it and go get her book, because it sounds like a fantastic book and it can help you be able to break out of that, because you deserve the best that you desire. So go out and have a great day. Beautiful moms, remember, you are unbreakable. Keep illuminating the world with your strength, pursuing your dreams, and reveling in the splendor of motherhood. This is Charisse Walker, bidding you farewell for now. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations on the next episode of the Unbreakable Mompreneurs podcast. Until then, keep shining bright. Signing off with love, Charisse Walker.